the idea, of like we're going to basically put our trust in this one person instead of this horrific machine that is doing these just obviously insane things. It's a scary call a little bit, but it's not as scary as keeping with what we're doing.
So that, just to kind of make sure I understand the argument, the binary that you've put forward is current trajectory is more of the same, even worse, hell on earth.
Yes, even if you elect Republicans to the White House and try to have them take control of it.
And then you say, therefore, we need to embrace the greatest of all ironies and become the thing we originally rebelled against. I'm not saying that sarcastically. I'm not even trying to...
and let me sort of ground this in American history a little bit, because there are really two American revolutions. There's one in 1775 and 1776, and there's another one in 1789. There's actually the Constitution. The Constitution is a reactionary coup against the Articles of Confederation. And if you ask anyone, even educated people, about the Articles of Confederation period, the only thing they know is that it existed. They don't know anything about the personalities, the events, whatever. It's been almost entirely airbrushed out of history. It's been airbrushed out of history because it was, if I can use this word on your show, a shit show. And basically, it was a shit show. And then people are like, why don't we take the commanding general of the army and make him king? And Washington was offered that. That was what, after basically seeing 12 years of turbulent Massachusetts style, Tea Party 1.0, tarring and feathering mob politics without even the British to be opposed to. They're like, we need a king. And Washington did something amazing. The founding, the true founding of this republic was we're going to create something that's really, I think, the ideal form of government, which is an accountable monarchy. Which is also the way these companies work. Elon has a board. Steve Jobs had a board. Ideally, the board does absolutely nothing. The board does nothing to govern, SpaceX. But if Elon's drug problem gets too bad, if he starts doing really crazy stuff, that board is going to step in. And so you have that kind of safety backup level. And in the constitutional system as it was originally designed, the Electoral College was supposed to be that board. And it just didn't work.
So I guess I'm sure this is an objection you receive a lot, and it's one I share. I want to be honest.
Please.
So you get a Lincoln, or you get a Washington, a great man.
Yeah.
And then Marcus Aurelius has Commodus.
Yeah, and so what you need is basically a system that will really actually preserve that accountable monarchy for the long term. Marcus Aurelius has Commodus, and before them there's this period of the five good emperors. Five good emperors, and they're all selected through adoption. I have a little pet theory about that. I think it was actually a long-running homosexual insider ring. Could be, I don't know. But in any case, Marcus Aurelius breaks the
mold, and he picks his son.
Breaks the mold, and he picks his son, and we've all seen that movie.
Yes.
Right,
and Commodus is
and so
Joaquin Phoenix.
Yeah, exactly. Joaquin Phoenix. And so you have to establish something that basically, I think you can learn a lot from the corporate model, which sort of works so well as a model of the accountable king.
Board of directors?
You need some kind of board-like thing. It's a little harder to do at the sovereign level. I have some designs for that, but I don't want to dive way too deep into, utter nerdery here.
Yeah, so is the system that so is one of your hypotheses being, since Adams and others would say you need the raw material of moral and religious people, therefore the Constitution, since we do not have a moral and religious people, and we kind of have this mishmash of different everything, therefore it's very hard to keep the Constitution?
I would say even more than that. I would say that, there's a great line. I urge everyone to go and read the last 10 paragraphs of FDR's first inaugural, because to say that it is based, it's not even based. It's metal. It's pure metal. And one of the things that FDR says is, he says, our Constitution is such a good document that basically we can change the way it's interpreted and we can get anywhere with that. And so when you look at the Constitution and you note that it says the president is the chief executive of the executive branch, it doesn't say the legislative branch should be running the executive branch. It doesn't say the judiciary branch should be running the executive branch. It kind of leaves all of that hanging. And because it leaves all of that hanging, you can look at this document, the Constitution, and you can say, we're just applying this in a slightly different way. And we're taking this branch that has become effectively subordinate, and we're applying, I forget, which was the Federalist paper where Alexander Hamilton talks about.
All men are angels?
Well, but no, where he talks about executive power. Is it 89?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
All men are angels is 51 or something.
Yeah. And like, and so you just sort of need to kind of rotate the Constitution a little bit. And you're still interpreting it sort of very, very clearly, but you're putting the president back in charge of the federal government.
I want to be on the record. I hope you're wrong. I hope
I would love to be wrong.
No, and so talk about that. Do you hope that the Constitution has staying power and that Americans aren't as depraved as they seem? Meaning that the structure can be a little bit revived and that we don't have, because once you go in this direction, it's not going back. It's just there's so many other.
You're going to a different place.
Because, for example, in the book Good to Great, which is all about corporate turning around, 5 million copies sold.
Yeah.
They talk about, look, as soon as an energetic, charismatic, visionary, genius CEO leaves, there was this Florida-based competitor to Walgreens that were pharmacies. He ran for the governor. What's his name? I can't remember. And it was Walgreens versus this. And it was amazing when he was CEO. He leaves and the company collapses in 15 years.
Yeah.
And so it's really
you've got to solve that succession problem.
And that's the most innocent example I can give.
Yeah. You absolutely have to solve that succession problem. I believe,
or that he just becomes a madman. I mean, that's
another. People get brain tumors. It happens, right? And so the thing is, you need the accountability part of that accountable monarchy. But the thing is, when you're in the process of like performing that transition, it's so delicate that you basically say, I have to trust this one person, and I have to trust this one person to establish that accountability system and to make that work. However, is basically, a presidential election is a forum of that kind of accountability. And so you need something that, the idea that basically, the founders were sort of building a machine of government that would last for the ages and govern this incredible continent for the ages. I don't believe that dream is dead at all.
So let me ask you, you alluded to this, and you said every 80 years we kind of have this super president.
It's like the San Andreas fault breaking, yeah.
So then is it a question, is basically what you're saying about saying is that it's either the right or the left that's going to claim that?
I think that it would be very hard for the left, because the thing is, the left has a sort of crabs in a bucket thing where it sort of pulls apart, like, to be a leftist, means you're friends with all the little Faucis or whatever. So to kind of stab them it would take a really, really amazing crisis for that to happen. Whereas,
like a Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, I don't think he could do it. I think that Barack Obama, even there were little places where Barack Obama like differed from, the blob, as his guys called it in the State Department.
Or the Borg, yeah.
Barack Obama, who has no ideological conflicts with these people, couldn't really direct them to do his will.
So the traditional pushback that you'll receive is, hey, we need the courts to disassemble the deep state. What is flawed with that argument?
What is flawed with that argument is that the courts you can't create a vacuum of power. And so to say the courts will disassemble the deep state.
Let Marshall send his army.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay, are you going to have the Supreme Court having an army to like do this? No, you're not. And so you basically see these sort of little conservative judgments. You just saw one on affirmative action in colleges,
Correct.
right? The court is like, no, actually, you shouldn't do this. Well, how is that going to be followed up? Is that going to be followed up by like a giant army of lawsuits ensuring that basically Harvard doesn't have its thumb on the scale for one race or its thumb against?
No, they'll keep doing it with minor adjustments, and they'll say, "Oops, sorry."
And they'll say, "Oops, sorry."
If they get caught,
they'll say, "Oops, sorry." If they get caught, right? And we've already seen this in California. We went through the whole thing.
They just don't follow the law. They
just don't follow the law. And so the thing is, basically, when the law is a dead letter, you have to realize that rule of law is great. We don't have it. So the question of how we get back to having it, like pretending that we have it, that's not a good way to get something you don't have, is to pretend that you have it. And so, when you look at especially like all of this lawfare, I was just reading this amazing Twitter thread where, the Democrats, if they sort of lost the count, I don't want to say lost the election because it's a count. If they lost the count
I like that.
in 2020,
Write that down. I like
they
that.
were going to do
The
all
count
of the
versus the
things
election.
times 10 that Trump, tried to do a little bit, and now everyone is getting prosecuted for it. They were going to do all those things with the masses in the streets, lawfare, alternate electors. They were going to do it all, right? And so when you have a court system that is fundamentally that deeply politicized, again, I love these black robes. I love, you have a great picture,
Clarence Thomas.
of Clarence Thomas up there.
Love the
Beautiful
guy.
robe. Love the guy. Amazing American. They're like, America is actually not short of virtue.
Talent.
Or talent. We just don't have it in large numbers.
Or in the right places.
Or the right places. We don't even have enough of it to make an oligarchy. But do we have enough of it to make a monarchy? Are there 1,000 people that could do the job that we just talked about? Hell yes.
So then the other part of institutional pushback that I'm sure that you'll receive is you're being overreactionary, neo-reactionary.
Neo-reactionary.
What is your response to that?
If you take reactionary as a political slur, which I sort of used it like gay people use queer, I'm like, I'm going to come out and say I'm a reactionary. And I'm a neo-reactionary really because I don't actually have a heritage of I'm not a traditional American. I'm basically an American Jewish communist, essentially. And so I don't have any cultural ties at all to the American right. And so I'm a traitor to my class, right? I'm defecting against these this horrible thing that rule by people like me has become. It's worse than you think out there. And so the thing is that basically I would say something, that a great political leader from about 100 years ago once said that, the task of the statesman is to take what is good about the past and learn from it and help to use build the future with it. We can't go back to the past. We can't return to the past. That's completely impossible. We can't turn back the clock and be Massachusetts in 1689. Those people don't exist. We can be our best selves. And the thing is, I'm really confident that with a government that isn't trying to destroy the country, it's an embarrassment, frankly, that we have trouble competing with China. The West has never had trouble competing with the East before, except when the West is really deeply sick. This country with a government that works is going to blow China out of the water.
What gives you hope?
The number of amazing Americans that still exist in this country. When you basically, they just need the right structure. And what gives me hope also is that basically, Americans have been getting much less violent and virtuous over time. And so, political systems that rely on them to be virtuous and violent at the same time, that's a concept that people can't even really parse today. But Americans have also been getting more sophisticated, more ironic. Every movie you see, every Super Bowl commercial is a joke, right? And so they're very, very good at breaking out of mental frames. They're very, very good at breaking their assumptions, at breaking out of Plato's cave, at saying, wow, what if this system was all a joke? What if these ideals don't mean anything? What if all these institutions I was taught to respect and love are just basically really bad people wearing a skin suit? That's more accessible to Americans than it ever has been. And that's what we need.
Is that uniquely, are you seeing that in other countries?
Yeah, it's modern. It's a modern.
In Germany, are they saying, our tradition of altering human biology needs to stop?
Well, Germany's traditions got pretty thoroughly rewritten in 1945.
Sure,
they're like a caricature of Berkeley.
They still worship chemists.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's a national culture still there,
exactly.
but the. No, I think that this is definitely, it's an effect of technology, it's an effect of affluence, it's the effect of many, many things. But the tool that Americans need to basically sort of, see the world as it actually is irony. It is.
So do you think irony is our superpower?
Irony is our superpower.
Finding the things that don't fit?
Irony is in finding the things that don't fit. And
being okay with it?
And being okay with that. And how ironic is Donald Trump? His powers of irony are immense. And that's the thing that he has that Ron DeSanctimonious doesn't have, and he has, and that feeling of he's simultaneously incredibly ironic and incredibly sincere. And that's the kind of flavor that it takes to sort of get people to realize that they can do what needs to be done.
Final thought. What books would you recommend for the audience? One or two where they could just, as jumping off points?
Good question. I really like the Chris Caldwell Age of Entitlement book. That's sort of fairly solid.
It's a favorite for our show.
Deeper political theory, but still very, very readable. There's a book by James Burnham.
Oh, yeah, of course. Sure.
Called The Machiavellian.
Suicide of the West? Or?
Not Suicide of the West, not The Managerial Revolution. Those are both fine books, but his masterpiece is called The Machiavellians, and it was written in 1940, and it's amazing because what The Machiavellians is all about is basically casting aside these illusions and sort of doing what Confucius said, which is to call everything by its true name.